year, there are 5 incumbents in those offices, but there's also a close U.S. Senate race, as well as 3 seats on the Ohio Supreme Court and 2 ballot issues. More than 943,000 voters have either asked for ballots by mail or cast votes in person at Board of Elections offices. And the Secretary of State's office also reports 37,479 people have signed up as poll workers, passing the goal of just under 36,000. But 46 counties have not met the goal of recruiting 115% of the workers they're expected to need. Many of them are rural counties, but also more populated ones, such as Hamilton, Lucas, Mahoning, and Montgomery. Of the 67 elections for Ohio governor since the current two-party system started in the state in 1855, Republicans have won 40 elections and Democrats 27. Ohio has been strongly Republican in even non-presidential years since 1994, except for 2006, when Democrats won all the executive offices but auditor. Ohio native Kyle Kondik is managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia. I asked him whether that success will continue for Republicans in Ohio this year, or whether Democrats will be able to grab victory this time.
One of the things that I saw that you wrote this week is that you wrote that Biden remains unpopular. The House generic ballot polling has gotten a little bit better for Republicans lately, but you would not be surprised if the numbers improve a bit for Republicans down the stretch. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, one thing about the House generic ballot polling, and again, it's just, national polling asking people whether they vote for a Democrat or Republican in their respective House district, or whether they want the Democrats or Republicans to have control of Congress. One thing about it is that historically it's been likelier to understate Republicans than Democrats. I don't know exactly why that is. And also there sometimes is some late kind of movement toward the opposition party in midterm years. I think we're probably seeing a little bit of that at this point. And what sort of seemed like for much of the cycle would be a Republican-leaning environment. It kind of got cloudy a little bit in the wake of the Dobbs decision and the increasing salience of abortion. There were some positive moments for Democrats, in sort of the late summer. Maybe things are sort of regenerating a little bit for Republicans. I don't know if that means this is going to be some sort of big wave year or something, but Republicans have been favored in the House the whole time, and I think continue to be. And even despite a lot of challenges in the race for the Senate, the Senate remains right there for the taking for Republicans. Obviously, they only need to net 1 seat. So, just watch sort of down the stretch to see if you're following the polls. If the numbers just start to get a little bit better for Republicans, that would not be unprecedented.
You also write that there are some weird things going on out there. So what do you mean by that? And do you mean specifically in Ohio or in other states?
I was thinking more in other states. You've had some polls in New York State showing the governor's race there that Democrat Kathy Hochul trying to run for a full term, that might be getting a little bit closer. Democrats also seem to be competing for the governor's race in Oklahoma, which is a red, pretty red state. There are some kind of upset potential races across the country. I would put the Ohio Senate race maybe in that category as well. So not all of the indicators are sort of pointing in the same partisan direction, although, again, I'd say that you probably would still expect this to be a Republican-leaning year, broadly speaking. But, of course, that also wouldn't mean the Republicans would win everything.
Do you think – I think there were Democrats who thought that they really had a lot more opportunity with the Dobbs decision, like you referenced earlier. Did Democrats peak too early?
I don't know if they peaked too early. I just think that there's a whole constellation of issues that people are concerned about. And, they're just some sort of basic kind of fundamental problems that Democrats have in this election. It's just hard to hold the White House in a midterm, generically speaking. Even sometimes when presidents are popular, they don't do all that great in the White House. And when they're unpopular, they usually do poorly. And, Joe Biden has remained unpopular. His approval is in the low 40s. It's been, it's better than it was at points during the summer, but it's still fairly weak. The public is often open to this idea that you sort of need a check and a balance on the White House, and so they're just more likely to want to vote for the opposition party. And there are some other important issues out there, like inflation and the economy, most notably, that are issues that I think Republicans are pretty comfortable running on. So again, that's not to say abortion isn't important. And also, let me make one other point. I think if Republicans do end up doing well in this election and win in both chambers of Congress, which again is right there for the taking, although the Senate still remains a pretty big question mark, I think there'll be this temptation to say, oh, well, the abortion issue doesn't matter, or the abortion issue is going away. Like, I don't think that's the case at all. Like, I think abortion has been important in American political life, and I think will continue to be important in American political life. You're probably going to see more statewide ballot issues having to do with abortion. Ohio is a very logical place for that to happen, given that it's not that difficult for outside groups to be able to get things on the ballot, statewide ballot in Ohio. And it's going to continue to be an issue that is, that I think is salient to voters. It's just not necessarily going to be the issue in every single election.
When we were talking about the weird things that are happening across the country and Ohio Senate race, that would be kind of one of these weird ones, because Donald Trump won Ohio by 8 points in 2016 and 2020, and yet the U.S. Senate race is considered pretty close here. Why is that race so volatile?
Look, I mean, I think that Tim Ryan has probably run a better campaign than J.D. Vance has. Ryan has certainly raised a whole lot more money, and it's forced a Republican outside group Senate Leadership Fund, which is kind of the most important player these days in sort of outside spending on the Republican Senate side. They've spent a lot of money in Ohio to try to sort of make up the advertising gap with Ryan. I thought all along that J.D. Vance was still favored in this race, given Ohio's political trajectory. We've had a couple of debates in the Ohio Senate race. I don't necessarily know if those debates really changed a whole lot about the trajectory of the race. And Tim Ryan has tried to get outside Democratic groups to come to his aid, and generally speaking, they haven't. I mean, at least the big ones. And so again, I still think this is Vance's race to lose down the stretch. It does seem like the Senate race is going to be, different maybe than the other statewide. It seems like the state executive offices, including the governorship, the Republicans look like they're in pretty good shape. And in all of those races, you've got state Supreme Court races that are probably question marks, although you've got party label on the ballot now in those races. And so that's probably going to be helpful to Republicans, you would think. So at the end of the day, I think you like the Republicans' outlook, broadly speaking, in the state. It's just that there are more question marks, I think, about the Senate race than the other races.
Is the Senate race simply going to come down to money?
No, I don't necessarily think so, because Ryan, of course, has raised a whole lot more than Vance. You have outside groups coming in, but one thing to note about when outside groups spend on TV ads is that they don't get as good of a rate based on federal law. The candidates themselves get better advertising rates. So Tim Ryan's dollars go further, and J.D. Vance's dollars go further than Senate Leadership Fund's dollars do on television. So that's, I think, an important thing to note. The public polling is sort of mixed. Vance has generally been leading by a little bit recently. I think it is reasonable to note that certainly, at least in 2016 and 2020, polling in Ohio, definitely underestimated Republicans. Maybe something like that happens again, although you never know from year to year which way the poll error might go.
Ohio now has 15 congressional seats, down from 16. How many of those do you consider toss-ups? I've seen 3 as an estimate. The new and open 13th district, featuring Democratic former House Minority Leader Amelia Sykes against Trump-endorsed Republican Madison Jessiotto Gilbert, but also the contest between Democratic Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur and Trump-endorsed newcomer J.R. Majewski, and also Trump-endorsed Republican incumbent Steve Chabot against Cincinnati City Councilman Greg Landisman. How many do you think there are? Is it just those, or are there ones I'm not missing, or that I am missing?
Those 3 are certainly by far the most competitive House elections in Ohio. I think Kaptur probably has a little bit of an edge in her district, although if in fact things sort of break toward the Republicans at the end, I think she's still in danger of losing, because even though she has a weak opponent, that's a Trump won district. Trump carried the district by 3 points, and it's sort of moving the wrong way for Kaptur. Of course, has been around for basically for 4 decades. Representing iterations of a Toledo-based seat. Her district used to extend all the way to Cleveland last decade. It's sort of more northwest, north central Ohio now. So I think if the Democrats have a chance to, a decent chance to win any of the districts in the state, the Kaptur one probably comes first. It's interesting because the other 2 are actually Biden won districts. Ohio 13, which is basically the new Akron-Canton seat, open seat that was a Biden +3 district, and then Steve Chabot's seat in Cincinnati is Biden plus high single digits, although it's not quite as blue down the ballot. I look at both the Ohio 13 and Ohio 1 races as toss-ups and give a slight edge to Kaptur in Ohio 9.
How will the governor's race, which is at the top of the ballot, affect the rest of the ballot? I mean, polling has shown that Mike DeWine is leading Nan Whaley by double digits. So how could that affect the down ticket races, the congressional races, U.S. Senate race, Supreme Court, all that?
Look, it's helpful if in fact DeWine wins this thing going away. It could provide some sort of some support down the ballot to some other candidates. Maybe in the federal races, maybe the districts look a little bit more like the Vance Ryan race, which looks like it's more competitive than the gubernatorial race. But it seems like there is a small but significant share of Democrats who, for one reason or the other, cross over to support Mike DeWine in the governor's race. Those folks probably aren't voting Republican in other races, and so maybe that shows up in some of the disparities, among the various races. I think there is less ticket splitting in American politics than there used to be, but you don't have to go back far to find, in Ohio, big differences among the races. Back in 2018, Sherrod Brown won the Senate race by 7 points, and Mike DeWine won by like 3 or 4. So you had basically a 10% difference in margin between the governor's race and the Senate race. I don't know if it'll be that dramatic this time, but it certainly could be. And certainly the polls that have shown the Senate race close and the governor's race not close indicates that they're picking up on some of these voters who might be splitting their tickets.
There have been 2 debates in the U.S. Senate race. There have been no debates in the governor's contest. Does the lack of debates really matter?
Probably not. I mean, DeWine is pretty clearly going with a classic front runner strategy here. It certainly feels like he's ahead, and he doesn't want to give Whaley, who I think has had trouble kind of building up her name ID statewide. He doesn't want to give her any oxygen. I guess from sort of like a normative standpoint, what's the quote unquote right thing to do or the good thing to do? You'd like to see the candidates making joint appearances and doing debates and that sort of thing. But it's not like this is the only state where there aren't debates going on in a major race. I mean, there have been debates about debates in other states. Some states, just like Ohio's governor's race, where you're not going to see really any debates at all. And again, like I think for observers and for voters, it's good to be able to see the candidates together, but there's no requirement that happens. And so sometimes, particularly when a candidate feels like he's ahead, there's no reason to do the debates, because you feel like the only way it could change the race is in a way that's unfavorable for you. So maybe it's not noble, but it's certainly understandable.
It may be too early for me to ask this, but you literally wrote the book on Ohio being the bellwether state. Is Ohio still a bellwether state as far as you can tell?
No, I don't think so. I think that book was it became history pretty quickly once I did it before the 2016 election. I just think that the political trends in the state, it's just become more Republican over time. I mean, think about it this way. So, 2012, Barack Obama won Ohio by about 3 points, national margin of about 4. So, and that was a long string where the Ohio vote was really very close to the national vote. But over time in 2016 and then 2020, Trump won about 8 points apiece. His national margin loss was bigger in 20 than in 16. So from a relative standpoint, Ohio stood still in 2020 while the rest of the country collectively, moved a couple of points more toward the Democrats. And so I don't think that Ohio is going to really be a presidential battleground in 2024. You do have the Senate race in Ohio with Sherrod Brown. I think that probably starts as something like a kind of a toss-up sort of race. We have seen in the past couple presidential elections, only one Senate race in those 2 separate years. Was there a candidate of one party who won the Senate race, despite the other party winning the state for president? Every other state had the same party win for president and for Senate. And you'd think that the Republican presidential nominee will win Ohio, and probably by more than just a couple of points. And so that puts Sherrod Brown, I think, in a challenging position. It's not an impossible position, but I think it's difficult, and I think there's going to be a lot of angling for for that Republican Senate nomination, just like you saw in 2022 when you had a pretty crowded field.